Hi, grade 7. This is the math video for lesson 3-1, page 118. And it's about things called square roots. It's also about things called perfect squares. And it's also about something called radical signs. And we have all sorts of problems here that maybe look difficult at first, but hopefully they won't be in a few minutes. First of all, what in the world do we mean by a square root? What do we mean by a square root? That's our first term. I can write on the board something that looks like this, and I can say the square root of 36. Everybody say that, the square root of 36. And then I can put an equal sign, and I can put an answer to that. And the question is, what's the answer to that? Well, when we're talking about square roots, what we're really saying is, think about this problem. A number, n, times the same exact number, n, gives me 36, and I'm trying to figure out what that n is, because that's what I want to put right here. The square root is the factor that you multiply it by itself to get to that 36. And it's got to be the same number. It can't be 4 and 9. We know that 4 times 9 equals 36. But it can't be 4 times 9 because that's not the same number. In this case, the answer is 6 times 6 is 36. So the answer is 6. Okay? 6 is the square root of 36. 6 is the square root of 36. What if I wrote the square root of 49? Hopefully you could say 7. 7 is the square root of 49 because 7 times 7 is 49. What if I said the square root of 64? That would be 8. What if I said the square root of 81? That would be 9. What if I said the square root of 100? That would be 10, wouldn't it? Yeah. So all of these are the square roots of all of these numbers right here. So hopefully that makes sense to you. What if I wrote the following on the board? The square root of 16. Could you tell me the answer? Hopefully 4 jumped out into your brain right away. But guess what? There's another number that it could also be the answer. Look at this. N times n equals 16. Yes, 4 would work. But watch this. Negative 4 would also work. Negative 4 times negative 4 is also 16. So technically, we could write 4 and negative 4 as the answer. Now, here's maybe something to blow your mind. Sometimes, instead of writing it this way, math teachers will write it like this. They'll say the square root of 16 is the positive value of 4 and the negative value of 4. So technically, if we talk about this, most of the time, teachers will be happy with you to write 4 as the square root of 16. But really, it's also negative 4, because negative 4 times negative 4 is 16. What if I wrote the following? The square root of 9. What would be the most popular answer to that? Hopefully, you know 3, right? The other answer, though, is that it's also negative 3. And again, sometimes math teachers will write it like this. The plus or minus value of 3 is the square root of 9. Okay? Now, let's talk about perfect squares. What in the world is meant by perfect squares? I'm going to write a set of numbers on the board. Do you know what they have in common? Do you know what they have in common? These numbers that I wrote on the board are perfect squares. Why, Mr. Ponko? Why are they perfect squares? Because I can get that number by taking 1 times 1. I can get that number by taking 2 times 2. I can get that number by multiplying 3 times 3. I can get that number by multiplying 4 times 4. And this number, 5 times 5, and so on down the road. These are what are known as perfect squares. Whoops, almost went too far. Perfect squares. The next one would be 121. The next one after that would be 144, then 169, then 196, then 225. I'm just multiplying those numbers together. 15 times 15 is 225. 14 times 14 is 196. 13 times 13 is 169. These are the perfect squares. Okay, what in the world do we mean by radical signs? Radical sign? It's just a fancy word for the square root symbol. We call this the square root symbol, or we call it the radical sign. Right? Radical sign, square root symbol, same thing. Same thing. So somebody could look at this and they could say, oh, what's the square root of 25? And you'd say, well, the answer is 5 or -5, but most of the time people just say 5, right? And then somebody could say to you, okay, there's a math problem. What number is inside the radical sign? What number is inside the radical sign of that problem? And you'd say 25, because the radical sign is this symbol and the 25 is inside of it. So, do these make sense? I hope they do. The square root, the perfect squares, and radical sign terms, what they all mean. Perfect squares are numbers like 1, 4, 9, 16, 25, 36, 64, 81, because that's what we get when we multiply these numbers by themselves. Radical sign, that's just a fancy word for the square root symbol. Square roots, well, we talked about that already. Let's try some example problems. Off to the right there. Can you see them? No, you can't. Okay. What's the answer to this problem? Hopefully you're saying 7. And maybe you're also saying -7. Look at this one. It's a little bit different. If it said the square root of 225, you just heard me a few seconds ago tell you that 15 times 15 is 225, right? So the square root of 225 is 15. But what if it does this? No big deal. What's the opposite? What's the opposite of the square root of 225? Well, that's got to be -15, right? How about the next one? This one's a little tricky because it's a decimal number. Let's do a little experimenting. What number times itself would get us to this point, right? Because after all, isn't that what we did up here? What number times itself gets us to 49, and we decided it's 7. So we've got to do the same thing here. Let's try 0.4 times 0.4. Let's see what we get when we multiply them together. I know I get 16. There's 2 decimal places. Boink. 1, 2. Hey, that must be the answer, sort of. But we can't forget about this. So it's -0.4. Or we could write it as -0.4. Either way, it's the same answer. How about this one? What's the answer to that? If you said 9, yay! We could also say what other number? -9, right? -9 as well. But most of the time, they're just going to ask for the 9 part. What's this one? What's this one right here? Okay, if it was like this, without that negative symbol, would you be able to tell me 12? So what's the opposite of that? The opposite of that would be -12. This looks tricky, but it's really not. It's really not. What it means is, what number times itself gets me 49 over 64? Well, it's not hard. Take these one at a time. What's the square root of 49? 7. What's the square root of 64? 8. So the answer is x is equal to 7/8. X is equal to 7/8. With me so far? I hope you are. I hope you are. Let's take a look at some of the problems in your textbook on page 118. Page 118. Oh wait, I forgot to do this word problem. I'm sorry. Word problem first. Word problem first. Imagine you have a square, and the square has the area of 14,161 square inches. And they want you to figure out the measure of one side. How do you think we'd do that? Well, let's try to solve an easier problem first. Okay? Imagine I have a square, and this particular square has an area of 81 square feet. And somebody says, what's the distance from here to here? Well, if it's a square, which is what I told you, then a side times a side has to equal the area, right? Side times side has to equal the area, which is 81. And so each of those sides have to be 81, right? Because 9 times 9 is 81. And so really, this is a square root problem. We're trying to find the square root of 81 to give us the value of s, aren't we? What is the square root of 81? It's 9, right? Square root of 81 is 9. So our answer is 9 feet in this case. Now, if that's how we solve this one, we're going to do the same thing over here. We got to figure out the square root of 14,161. Mr. Bongo, there's no way we can figure that out. Well, yeah, there is. But we'll talk about that tomorrow. Yes, on these big huge numbers like this, you can use a calculator and use the square root button. Sometimes you have to press the square root button first and then 14,167. But on other calculators, sometimes they have you push in the number first, 14,161, and then the square root button. You're just going to have to play around with your calculator to decide which one is which. But ultimately, the answer to this problem is 119 inches. Because 119 times 119 is 14,116, or 61 rather. So that's that one. Okay, page 118. Page 118. Let's look at some of those problems there, starting with number 5. If I said the square root of 25, you'd say square root of 25? Hopefully you'd say 5. My pen's dying, isn't it? I need a new pen. Number 6, the negative square root of 100. Well, if it was this, the answer would be 10, right? So what is it if they put a negative symbol out front? It's negative 10. How about the next one? Number 7, negative 16 over 81. And we're trying to figure out the square root of negative 16 over 81, right? No, I wrote that wrong. Ignore what I just said. It's the negative sign out here. That makes a big difference. So first of all, what's the square root of 16? 4. What's the square root of 81? 9. And it's the opposite of 4 nines. So there's our answer. We've got 3 answers so far. How about number 8? Oh my goodness. What do I do with 0.64 if somebody tells me, hey, find the square root of that? Well, I know that the square root of 64 is 8, right? So what would be the square root of 0.64? Maybe it's 0.8. Let's try it out. Let's see what 0.8 times 0.8 is. Oh, yeah, it is. It is. So the answer is 0.8. 0.8. Let's look at the next one. P squared equals 36. And they want to know what P is. What number times itself gets us to 36? What number times itself gets us to 36? And the answer in this case is either 6 or it could be negative 6, right? 6 or negative 6. How about the next one? N squared. N squared equals 169. N squared equals 169. Well, what number times itself gets you to 169? Isn't it 13? But there's a second answer. You could also write negative 13, because negative 13 times negative 13 is positive 169. How about the next one? 900 equals r squared. 900 equals r squared. Well, isn't that r times r equals 900? Or what number times itself equals 900? And if you take the square root, you get either 30 or you get negative 30 as an answer to that particular problem. How about the next one? That's kind of tricky, but it's not really that bad. What if you're supposed to find the square root of 1/9? How do you do that? The square root of 1/9. Well, they wrote the problem actually like this. T squared equals 1/9. for problem 12. T squared equals 1/9. But really what they mean is, hey, what number times itself gets me to 1/9? And that means I've got to take the square root of the 1 and the square root of the 9 and figure out what those equal, right? What is the square root of 1? 1. What is the square root of 9? 3. So isn't the answer 1/3? Yeah, it is. Let's check that. Let's see what happens when we multiply 1/3 by 1/3. 1/3 by 1/3. Do we get 1/9? Yes, we do. T must be 1/3. Okay, hopefully that helps you. Thank you. Have a good day.